The Huskers struggle early, but weather a storm of penalty flags to get a win. Let's get into it. Hi, I'm Aaron Muller, and welcome to Cobsmacked. This is a Nebraska football channel where we cover the Husker season and team news. If you enjoy the content, please be sure to drop a like and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this. So before we get into the recap for this Indiana Hoosiers game, and recap that exciting victory that we got for the Huskers, I'd like to shout out Scott and Ken over at Generation Red Podcast. I just got done doing a an Indiana recap and a short preview into the Rutgers game on their live stream. And I had a blast talking Husker football. It was nice to talk to somebody outside of this room about Husker football, and there was a lot of different perspectives bouncing around. So go ahead and go give that a listen. That's Generation Red on any podcast app, or you can find them at Gen Red Pod at YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. I'll leave a link down below just in case you can't find it. They do have a website as well, so I'll leave that down below as well. But go give that a listen, but on to our show. So we're going to recap the Week 5 game against the Indiana Hoosiers. So Nebraska ended up pulling out the win. Looking at the passing yards, we had 270 through the air on 27 attempts. We had 115 on the ground on 51 attempts, and so that ended us at 385 yards total offense on 78 plays. Indiana, on the other hand, had 223 passing yards on 44 attempts, 67 rushing yards on 23 attempts, putting them at 290 with 67 total offensive snaps. Looking at our defense, we had 3 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and 1 interception. The Hoosiers had 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 1 interception of their own. Special teams, we did not attempt a field goal. We had 8 punts, though, for an average of 39.1. They also did not attempt a field goal, but they had 10 punts, averaging 44.3. First downs, we had 22 to their 14. We had 35.14 time of possession compared to their 24 and 46. Penalties, we had a whopping 12 penalties for 111 yards, and they did slightly better at 11 penalties for 92 yards. So getting into what those stats mean, offensively, it was a mixed bag. There was lots of spark, but no real sustained fire for this team. Looking at the different position groups, the offensive line, they showed success and failure. The success and failure of the whole entire offense followed the offensive line play. So when they played well, the offense looked fine. When they struggled, though, and they had some penalties and stuff, it was just a combobulated mess back there. They showed stretches once again at playing solid football, especially early in the game, but then 10 minutes later, they looked like a completely different, offensive line. Opening holes and protecting Casey was a thing that they could do sometimes, but not all the time. So the consistency there is just not there for the offense to be sustainable. But they show sparks, they show improvement. And I, again, as harsh as I am on the offensive line, I always do kind of balance that out with reminding everybody that we have 3 upperclassmen on that depth chart. The rest of them are sophomores or freshmen. We have 1 true freshman in there somewhere. We have a lot of young guys, and that's not, I can't think of the word. That's not helpful to building an offensive line culture that's going to be able to go up against Iowas and Michigans and Ohio States. So they have their reasons why they're not very good, but at this point in time, they are not very good. According to PFF, they weren't credited with any of the sacks on 17 blitzes. Hunter Anthony did swap in playing time with Bryce Benhart. A lot of people, were saying that Hunter Anthony played better, and if you look at the eye test might look one way, but the stats differ. So Anthony graded 20 points lower than Benhart did on the night, and so that might be part of it. One of the things that my psychology teacher told me in college was that what stats reveal is misleading, but what they hide is vital. It's very much like a bikini. So they might show you one thing, but they actually don't mean what you think they mean. You have to look into it a little deeper. The offensive line was responsible for 4 penalties, as I mentioned. This included 2 of them on Corcoran, which, one of them was he was pushing a guy off of his quarterback who was like keeping his quarterback on the ground. And then the next snap, he gets thrown out of the game for punching a guy in the face, which I don't consider that a punch. It was more like he pushed his head back down after he had knocked him to the ground. But we've seen our linemen called for anything and everything. You look back last year at Cam Jurgens, he got called for being aggressive more often than not. So we don't get those calls going our way, but Nebraska's going to get called for that nearly every time. So he got ejected from the game, which kind of put the offensive line in a position the way it was. I'm all for the guy getting, blocked and pancaking a dude and keeping him on the ground, but you got to make sure that there's no extracurriculars. You can't let your emotion get the best of you to the point where you're getting thrown out of a game. again, I don't have problems with you being aggressive. I encourage that highly, especially on the offensive line. I want you to be physical. I want you to get guys to the ground, but you got to make sure that you're playing within the rules. Looking at Casey Thompson, so he went 18 for 27 on the night for 270 yards and 1 interception. That's a 67% completion rate. He did struggle with consistency through 3 quarters. He seemed to hold on to the ball a little bit too long instead of scrambling. There was opportunity for him to take off when there was nothing downfield, and he just didn't. And I'm not sure what exactly is causing that. I'm not sure if he's nursing a wound or if he's trying to prove his arm talent for the NFL. I'm just not sure why exactly he's not taking off. Is it that there is so much pressure coming from the offensive line that he's, kind of in his own head? He's not knowing if he's going to get hit, so he's just playing mind games with himself. I'm not sure, but whatever the reason is, the defense noticed. The defense blitzed on over 50% of his dropbacks, and it impacted his game dramatically. He went 47% completion rate versus the 79% completion rate when he had a clean pocket. And he had over triple the yardage when he was not blitzed. So again, I don't think he's doing it intentionally. I think that it's something that he's not really paying attention to, that he's hesitating, or he's too busy thinking about, passing it to certain receivers or waiting for a guy to come open. He's just holding the ball too long, and you've seen how Whipple kind of reacted to that. But he did go down with a shoulder injury in the third quarter, which when it happened, I was like, oh God, like that's not good. Like, who his backups are. And it's not that they're bad necessarily. It's just that they don't have any more experience than anybody else. So it was a very big scare. Chuba Purdy ended up coming in for one play that next series, but then Casey came back out, and oddly enough, he seemed like he played better after the injury scare than he did before that. So maybe he was in his head a little bit before that, and then just getting, hit and having some kind of realization that, like, my season could be over any time. I need to play, a little better. Whatever it was, the fourth quarter went almost perfectly for him. He went 4 of 6 for 93 yards, a touchdown through the air, and a touchdown on the ground. So, I mean, he did end up coming out in the fourth quarter when you really needed him to and making some big plays. But we need to be able to be consistent with that throughout the whole game, and that might tie back to the offensive line. I always say that the offensive line, everything lives or dies by the offensive line. Same goes for the defense. The defensive line is vital to the defense's success. But maybe that's, it's as simple as that. The offensive line needs to show more consistency for Casey to be consistent as well. Although the wind was apparent on the field, it didn't seem to affect his deep ball. He did miss a few opportunities in the first half with wide receivers running wide open. I don't think that was due to the wind. I don't know if he's seen them or if he was too busy feeling pressure from the offensive line letting guys through. But whatever reason, he didn't let the ball go early. But once he did pull the trigger on those deep balls, he went 4 for 6 beyond 20 yards, 2 of them coming with touchdowns. So looking at the running backs, Anthony Grant showed off his skill set once again. He put that guy on spin cycle. There was one play where he spun like 5 times before he went to the ground finally. He had 32 carries for 136 yards, and that's 4.3 yards per carry. He hits contact and he fights through it and gets those extra yards. I mentioned that he was going to have to do that. I mentioned him and Trey Palmer were both going to have big games. They both kind of showed up in this game, which we'll get to Trey a little later. But Anthony Grant got contact. The offensive line did not keep that clean for him. They did not give him big gaps to run through, but he fought through it, and he was consistently getting 3 and 4 yards at a time. He never did really bust off a big touchdown run like you're waiting for him to do. He has opportunities. He's just missing it by tiny margins. He's going to get one of those eventually. His longest of the night was 17 yards, so a lot of those were just short yardage gains, but that sets up your offense for good second and third downs. So he's consistent. It's nice to have a guy that you can hand the ball off to and kind of depend on him to get 3 and 4 yards at a pop. So they did bring in Jaquez Yant on the goal line touchdown. He had 2 carries, I believe, and he did punch it in for a touchdown, which that was nice to see as well. There was a couple opportunities where we got down to the goal line. There was no real trick plays. It was kind of just, physical your way into the end zone, and that's how it went. But it was nice to see Yant get used in a game, even if it was a very tiny role. You wish you would see more Irvin, but you cannot take out Grant when he is playing the way he is playing. So there's nothing really more you could expect from him. He is going to bust off these big plays eventually, and that might, again, tie back to the offensive line's success. Looking at the tight ends, you didn't see much from that group tonight. You had 2 catches on 5 targets, and some of that's on Casey. He did throw behind Vokalek on one of them that I can remember. But they were great in the blocking game, the pass protection, running plays. So Brewington, as always, has been that devastating goal line force that he is known for. All those clips of him, just, that motion where he blows up some guy on the right side, doesn't stop. So he had another, couple of those last night. Looking at the wide receivers now. So wide receivers across the board have been pretty good this year. Oliver Martin stepped up his game tonight, and it's probably his best game as a Husker. I'm going to admit that I almost wrote him off the past 2 seasons based on the performance the past 2 seasons, both in the return game and then it seemed like he was dropping passes or he just wasn't getting open, or a lot of times it looked like he was lacking effort out there. So that's, I'm not too big to admit when I'm wrong on a guy. So he caught 3 for 3 on his targets. One was for 21 yards, one was for 34 yards. He made some big plays last night. He got a touchdown for himself. He earned that. He fought through a lot of adversity, and he played motivated. I'm not sure. You see that across the board on guys on offense and defense last night, special teams as well, which we'll get into. A lot of guys were playing with motivation and confidence like you have not seen in the last 4 years, and Mickey's kind of pulling that out of them, and that's nice to see for once. But the MVP of the game has to go to Trey Palmer. He really held the offense together. When you needed a big play, he was the guy to go to. He talked about it after the game. That's why I'm here. That's what I'm going to do. So he made big plays. He had that incredible catch that they thought was grounded. They thought it hit the ground before he caught it. They went back and reviewed it, and they overturned it. Just all finger strength. He had body control on that, and it was incredible to watch him. There was another play earlier in the game with Washington who had one just like that, where he traps it, catches it before the ground gets it. And you need plays like that. Guys are playing motivated. Like, there's no reason for you to make that much effort if you don't care. These guys obviously care. So obviously you can look at his Trey Palmer 71-yard touchdown run. That's just all speed on his part. They talked about it after the game that Mickey said he told Casey, when you're throwing a Trey downfield, just put your foot down and throw it as far as you can, and he'll get to it. So that's definitely what it looked like. He was able to burn the guy, and he beat him by 10 yards. It did look like the wind even might have affected that a little bit because he was running to the left, and he kind of had to swoop back and grab it, and then ended up there was no chance he was getting caught. So Trey Palmer was 8 of 9 on the night for catches. He had 1 for 34, and then obviously that 71-yard touchdown bomb. So the offense overall, when they played well, they played well. They did struggle a little bit. There was a lot of penalties, a ton of penalties throughout the whole game, which usually that leads to us, blowing up and shooting ourselves in the foot. But the guys never gave up. The offense seemed to, especially in the fourth quarter, they came alive. They showed motivation. They showed energy. They showed the want to win, and that really played out. So now we're going to flip over to the defensive side. The defense played better overall compared to the last 4 games, especially in that second half. They held Indiana to 71 yards and 0 points in the second half. That's after giving up 219 yards in the first half and 21 points in the second quarter alone. Going into halftime, they were able to make up that 21 points and make it a tie game going into halftime. You were a little worried that, based on the past 4 games, there was going to be no adjustments made, and Indiana was going to come out and just win the game from us. And that didn't happen. The Black Shirts came out. Again, Black Shirts is defense. Black Shirts came out and they played a great second half, shutting them out, not allowing a single point. And they did very well on the night. Across the board, they seemed to play faster, more aggressively. They played a lot more free than they have been. We talked about it on the Generation Red podcast that they had no fear of failure, that they did not worry about making mistakes. They just played confident in their ability, and it really showed out. You can attribute that to Bush simplifying the plays. You can say that he allowed them to play more freely than Scott did, that there was less thinking going on. They were lined up for most, if not all, of the snaps on defense, which was not something else you had seen. Whatever it was, it worked, and they came out and played so much better. The pass rush was more consistent. They had 3 sacks, 6 quarterback hurries, and 6 tackles for loss. 16 of those 17 quarterback pressures came from the defensive line and edge guys alone. There was no need to blitz out extra guys every play just to get pressure on the quarterback. And you needed that in this game where they rely heavily on their passing game. You needed your line to be able to get back there and cause havoc with that quarterback, and they did. They came out and showed out. They were also helped by the tighter pass coverage, which I mentioned going into the game. We were going to have to play tighter. We weren't going to be able to give them 10 yards, off the line of scrimmage and keep everything underneath. You have to play confident in your abilities. And multiple times completions were knocked out by guys getting in there and raking their arms through and popping the ball out. And That's great to see. Again, effort. I want this more than you do, and that's something you wanted to see. Even the true freshman Malcolm Hartzog came in his first career start. He allowed 1 catch on 6 targets, and 2 of those were pass breakups where he got his hand in there and knocked it out. He was graded the highest in the secondary, which, it's kind of a mixed bag. You're happy for the guy that in his first career start he had such a good game, but you also expect your other secondary to kind of be up there as well and have a higher grade than that. He did miss some on the run plays and things like that. He missed a tackle, I believe, but he's a true freshman in his first game ever. He had a big night, even bigger as we'll get into later. The Reimer and Henrich duo didn't miss a single tackle in the game, and that is something you can look at and be like, what? Compared to how the previous 4 games went. They did well in coverage as well. Reimer had a massive hit, and you can credit his great awareness to grab a loose ball before it hit the ground. He knocked the socks off some dude, and the ball was kind of just laying on his chest, and Reimer staring at it right in the face. Before it rolls off that guy and hits the ground, that would probably be ruled an incompletion because the guy didn't really maintain control of it. But before it hits the ground, Reimer picks it up, and it's ruled an interception. They did go back and kind of look at that for targeting because it was such a vicious hit. Clean, good play, good awareness on Reimer's part. It was credited as an interception, kind of looked like a fumble, but it was a turnover all the same. Henrich was just as good. He was targeted 5 times, and the guy caught it all 5 times, but he only allowed a combined 28 yards. So when the guy did catch it in front of him, he made sure he didn't get past that point. Reimer had 4 targets, and he did not allow a single catch. So the entire team tackled so much better than the previous 4 games. As I mentioned, the inside duo did not allow a single missed tackle. We had 6 missed tackles on the entire defense this game compared to nearly 14 average through the first 4 games. The team also held Indiana to 2 of 15 on third down conversions. They were able to get these stops, get off the field, and allow the offense to come back out. And that's not something we're used to either. We're used to getting down to 3rd and 13 and just allowing some busted play where they get a first down and they keep their drives alive. Our defense stays out there for 35, 40 minutes, and then they get tired, and then we get scored on. I was not expecting this from the defense. Going into the preview, I mentioned I thought it was going to be a shootout. I thought this was going to be offense versus offense. The defense came out, and they really played really well all game. Not play a great game, obviously. You would expect them to get back to the quarterback a little bit more based on Indiana's offensive line struggling just about as much as Nebraska's. There was a lot of holding going on, but again, you're going to have to play through that. That's happened to Nebraska since they joined the Big Ten. But, you got to be happy of the performance that the defense gave you this game when you haven't been used to seeing that the last 4. Looking at the special teams, we did not attempt a single field goal, as I mentioned, but Brian Buschini did have 8 punts for 39.1 yard average. He did shank a couple, and I don't know if that's all on him or if some of that's the wind. But as I mentioned this past week too, he mentioned it as well, that the average distance is everything. He said comparing, one punter to another by saying this guy averages 45 yards per punt and this guy averages 39 yards per punt. That's not completely accurate because sometimes you don't want to boot it as far as you can because it'll go through the end zone and be a touchback. Sometimes you only want to get it 25 yards downfield and pin them within their own 10. And he certainly came out and showed that today. 3 of his 8 punts were pinning Indiana within their own 15. That's something you want. That definitely put a lot of pressure on them to get out of their end zone, and there was a couple of times where they didn't. There was one where the punter had his heels to the white line on the back of the end zone. They did get it off, but it is whatever. The punt returns were a little bit frustrating. I think we did have 4 come out for 78 yards total, which is 78 more yards than we would have seen any other time in the past. We are attempting to bring them out some, which is good to see. I want to see more of that. But it seemed like Trey Palmer specifically, there was a couple of times where he could have turned on the jets and burned past some dudes. I don't know if he was waiting for kind of coverage to develop or lanes to open up or what he was doing. But while he was thinking, he was freezing where he was, and he only gets 10 yards when he could have had 15, 20, 25. I'm obviously saying that. I don't know what it looked like down on the field, but it just seemed from looking up above that he was not moving. And I think a lot of times on that kick return game, both on covering punts and taking it to the house, speed is going to win out almost every time. There's not a whole lot of shiftiness that goes on. It's almost all speed, burning past guys, running through lanes, but it's going to be speed. And if we need to be more confident in the run, we need to kind of pick and choose and just put the jets on and not be afraid that this is the wrong decision. It's the decision you made, make the most out of it. But fighting for the biggest play of the game was a special teams play. It was the block and score touchdown by that freshman Malcolm Hartzog. As I mentioned, in his first career start, he did very well in pass coverage, as I mentioned, but he recovered a blocked punt by Chris Kolarvik and ran it back for a touchdown. That's the first score from a blocked punt since 2009. It's been a long time. I was off the couch when that happened. Is that even allowed anymore, that we score points off of a special teams play? But I mean, it was great to see. That's definitely up there against that 71-yard touchdown bomb for the biggest play of the game. But it definitely felt good. It definitely felt like a momentum shift, and everybody was happy. Everybody was, cheering that on down on the field. The players specifically were just, everybody seemed so full of energy during this game. It was fun to watch. So overall, what does this win mean for the program? Obviously, there were issues going into the game, looking at it, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Questionable decision-making on offense, both between the personnel choice of who was going in there. Trey Palmer would make a big play and then kind of get pulled out for a play or two, and why is he just not on the field all the time? The offensive coordinator had some issues. The quarterback had some issues. Offensive line obviously had some issues. I think Whipple pulling Casey out after he held the ball too long and took a sack. You can see the clips. He rips into Casey on the sideline, and I think that he let the emotion get the better of him. He did put Chubba Purdy in there, who ended up, it was a disaster of a thing. He put Chubba Purdy in there, short notice. I don't think Chubba was really kind of warmed up. It was near the goal line, and he ended up getting hit in the end zone. Thought it was going to be a safety, but the ball pops out, and it's an Indiana touchdown. So I understand trying to send a message, but and maybe hindsight is kind of hazing my view on the whole situation a little bit, but I do think that decision to pull Casey out and putting Chubba into a position where he's not ready, he wasn't like prepared to go in, and it was, backed up against your own end zone. I think that's really what gave up the touchdown, and I think in hindsight, maybe he doesn't make that same decision. Looking at Casey, he did end up hitting Palmer on that 71-yard touchdown bomb, but he did miss him and others running open quite a few times during the game. Was it vision? Was it that he was worried about getting sacked? Was he just not confident in the deep ball given the wind on the field? I don't know. But again, that backed with the decision to not scramble sometimes. I'm not sure if he's overthinking things or if he's I'm not sure. I know he has shown that he is able to play. He is more consistent when he does throw it. So it's not like it's not like an Adrian situation. Adrian made the offensive line look better because he was able to scramble. I'm not expecting Casey to be that guy. I'm not expecting him to be an explosive runner, but he does still need to utilize his legs, get away from pressure, roll out to the right, still allow the ball to go down the field, but you got to take what you got, and a lot of times you're not given a whole lot. So the offensive line did look good at first, but we need to work on consistency, as I mentioned. Against a better passer, Nebraska's defense is also going to struggle. There was a lot of times where Indiana's wide receivers were running. They blow right past our guys. They would make a move on our guy and just get past him. And Baszler just overthrew the guy, or he threw it outside. If you go up against a quarterback who's able to make that throw, you're going to pay for it dearly. And as much as I was praying the secondary, as I mentioned, the true freshman was the one that had the highest grade. And you can't have that. You got to have your guys that have been there in the program longer. They have to make plays on that. And they have to keep up with guys. They got to know that they're going to get burned. And part of that might be that they're still getting used to the timing. As I mentioned, that they weren't playing so far off the ball as they were last time. It wasn't a keep it underneath momentum mentality. But if you're going to play it close, you got to make sure you're keeping up speed with guys. And that's something that will come with time, especially for the younger guys. But a few of those could have gone for touchdowns, and that would have put the game in a bit of a different scenario, I think, especially if they score. Like I mentioned, there was 3 or 4 that he just missed on a touchdown pass. And so if they get burned like that going into the especially November, we're going to be in a lot more worse position. But we got to take that all into consideration, that a win is a win, especially for this team who needs it very, very dearly. And especially given the circumstances in the program over the past month, it's kind of incredible that you can look at it and see how much these guys are playing still and how much they are still bought in. And a lot of that has to be credited to Mickey Joseph. He gets a win after a bye week, which is something that Scott Frost was not able to do at any point during his tenure here. He wasn't able to get a win at the beginning of the season after a bye week. and Mickey does it with his very first bye week is his very first win. So I hope that they take the night to celebrate. I understand that as a Husker fan tonight, you're very excited, and you should check the emotion because this is a struggling Indiana. And they were without their two best receivers, but at the same time, it's been such a drought of success that you have to take any droplet of victory you get and cherish it, and you're going to. You just can't let that kind of override into the next game, which it's a short week going into Rutgers on Friday night. So Mickey's got to, he was given the game ball at the end of the game in the locker room. Everybody's seen the clip. You got to be happy for that guy that there's so much energy. Those guys, the players are so pumped to be playing for him, and everybody's just excited, where the program's going. And I think you need to appreciate what you have in a win here. But like I said, the team looks motivated and unified behind Mickey Joseph. So looking forward, we do have a shortened week when we go to Piscataway and play Rutgers on a Friday night game. And oddly enough, with that win, though, Nebraska is in a 6-way tie for first place in the Big Ten West. So everything that the team wants is still in front of them. There's still a path to get to the Big Ten championship game. That's obviously a long ways away from this Nebraska team, but one game at a time. We're going to go into Rutgers. Hopefully we play a really good game. And only time will tell. One game at a time, but everything's still in front of you. There's nothing lost on the season. There's no reason to be down on yourself. And obviously these guys don't play like it. So that's going to wrap up this week's recap. Be sure to check in for next week's pregame analysis. Comment and find me on Twitter down below at Cobsmacked Media. Also, be sure to go back and watch the Generation Red podcast wherever you get your podcast, or at Gen Red Pod on Twitter. But until next time, go Big Red.